Sarah.
Hi. My name is Sarah Danziger, for those of you who don't already know. Most of you have seen before. I'm the education program manager here at CPW, which is where you are sitting right now. You are in our gallery. We have an exhibition right now of Brenda Ann Keneally's work. It'll be up for another week. Next week, she'll be here doing an artist talk about this work. So if you want to learn more about it, that'd be a great time to stop in. Tonight, we are joined by Magali Duzant and Lindsay Buchman. Did I say that? Okay. Magali is an artist and writer based in New York and Zurich. Working in photography, text, and installation, she has created commissioned public works for Memorial Sloan Kettering, Super Collider, ABC No Rio, and Artists Alliance Inc. Her work has been widely exhibited, including at Antenna Gallery, I know that, Queens Museum, Olympia, Center for Contemporary Photography, Little Berlin, UQO Gallery, the 2018 Martin Biennial, and Gilman Barracks. Residencies and grants include NARS Foundation, Studio Verde, New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and Parramatta Artist Studio. She has published 4 artist books, and her upcoming book, La Vie is Like That, will be released by Seaton Street Press in spring 2024. So we are also joined by Lindsay Buchman of Seaton Street Press. She's an interdisciplinary artist, writer, and publisher living and working in Hudson, New York. Her work explores image making and writing through print and lens-based media, artist books, and installation. Exhibitions of her work include the LA Art Book Fair at the Geffen Contemporary, MoCA, New York Art Book Fair, MoMA PS1, Tokyo Art Book Fair, Museum of Contemporary Art Tokyo, Sprint Milano, Spazio Meoki, and Till Institute of the Contemporary Image. She is a recipient of the Toby Devin Lewis Fellowship and the Flaherty Fellowship, and a 2023-24 keyholder resident at the Lower East Side Print Shop. As an extension of her practice, she runs an independent artist books and publications project, Seaton Street Press, to collaborate with artists through publishing and distribution. Can we give them, I think Lindsay's starting. Can we give her a warm welcome? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming and being here. Also, is my volume okay? Yes. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of this project that I run, and it was founded in 2018. It was based in Philadelphia, a dedication to a studio I used to have in Los Angeles in California, and it moves around a lot. So it is now in Hudson. A lot of the work that I publish and artists that I work with are thinking about site as a place that is temporal, as a place that's always changing. And a lot of the work that I end up engaging with has different forms of meditation on place. So I wanted to just show a few images of recent projects. This was an exhibition that took place at the University of the Arts, Solmennik Gallery, at the end of last year. It includes images from a range of publications, I think to date at that time. The prints on the wall are by Alina Wong. Those are photographic and cyanotape-based images. I also do publish a lot of ephemera, so things that are more ethereal and impermanent. Newspaper printing comes up a lot, as well as publications that are a little bit more fixed in terms of their form. So there's a softcover book on the right. There's a project that released with William Camargo, who was featured here at CPW and was an artist in residence last year as well. And I think that the two of these images kind of speak to the way in which photography shows up in this work and the use of documentation, which is really important to me as an interdisciplinary artist and as someone who works in photography myself, that the presentation of these projects exists in a way that kind of speaks to the form of the work. So I wanted to just include one kind of backstory or contextual image of my work as an artist that led me to publishing. I was making a lot of artist books between 2015, honestly up until the present, but at this time it was 2015 to 2017. And I ended up making so many books and did not know what to do with them. And it led me to publishing and thinking about how distribution could be a form of access for artists, particularly at that time in my own work, where books could circulate. And so I started this press and initially was distributing all throughout the country, and it has led me more to international exhibitions and book fairs more recently, but it has also grown widely beyond my own work. So I think initially it was out of an interest to publish and to distribute and to have a home and to find a place for the work to be in conversation with other artists, and then has since led to a lot of projects over more recent years of publishing friends, people that I've met through friends, people outside my community. And so that's what I'm going to talk about, is a range of projects that I have worked on. I usually like to start by presenting Stephanie Garcia's work, De Aquí para Allá, that is a project that was the first production that came out of the press in 2019. So this project was made with Stephanie Garcia. She is a Philadelphia-based artist. She's from Los Angeles, California. And so the work was really about her family's stories of immigration and being undocumented and crossing the US-Mexico border. The book is primarily text-based. It's forms of communication that are translated from audio interview. And so a lot of the work was about translation. The book is bilingual. It's both in English and Spanish. And there's an emphasis on what gets lost in translation, as well as ways of communication depicted through things like these pinned up pieces of paper that are written transcription between the artist and her mother, and the things that are sometimes not translated. So kind of viewing what the experience is of being undocumented, experiencing stereotypes within the US that are all too familiar within the Latinx community, and also really celebrating familial history through things like resistance and care and struggle that come through in the interviews. So it's mostly a text-based work. It's really important, I think, to the grounding of the press and the way that language continues to function in a lot of the projects that I publish. This is definitely a more language-based project, minimal imagery, but I think really important to also the core of like the importance of storytelling and why personal identity has a lot of power in the book. So that one is the beginning of practice. Most recently, and I think probably what the press is known for, would be William Camargo's project, We've Been Here, which released last year. This project was produced, as I mentioned, while Camargo was in residence here at CPW. And so I was up here proofing with him and bringing him proofs of the project. This project is based out of Southern California in Orange County. It is about Anaheim, where Camargo grew up. This is a county that is predominantly a Latinx community, but demarcated by Disneyland's presence. And so a lot of his work is pushing back on the relationship between class and those who are invisible within their own community. So a lot of his work is about picturing people that he knows, friends, family members, people that he has direct relationships with, and centering and kind of retelling Anaheim's history. So the images often are portraits. We worked with archival photographs during this one. I think the role of the archive is central to a lot of my publishing. It's something that I think has come up in most of the artist practices that I work with. Just to note, the image on the left is from the public archive in Anaheim that William was working from, and then mixed with a lot of his photography. And some images of the special collection, which is here at CPW in the collection, include the box set, which is screen printed and risograph printed. A lot of the work that I'm making through the press these days is risograph printing. And so it's specialized 3 to 4 color print production, where it's separating out colors, printing by hand, but mimicking photographic spaces. So those of you that know risograph know that it is a mechanical process. It's very intensive by hand. But William's project, it really was about creating something that could be collected and distributed more widely. So this project lives in a lot of libraries and museum collections throughout the US, and as well as in a lot of like friends of the artist collections who purchased during that time. And the production on this project includes poetry. So again, I think that relationship to language comes back. The artists work with a poet in his community. The poetry is sort of centered and overlaid on the essays that come from another artist in the community. And it's this way of foregrounding things that might be more accessible with perhaps a more canonized essay. And the essay really articulates what has been happening in Anaheim, as well as kind of retelling of who is present, who might not always be visible. Another project that was worked on in last year before, like The Delayed Rays of a Star by Heather M. O'Brien. This project is more of a traditional photo book. It includes essays. It includes multiple authors who are involved, including Corinne Botts, who is here with us in the audience. And I think this project was one in which the artist was really thinking about what is the responsibility of photographic documentation of a place when you're not from that place. Heather's work really grapples with photographing her experience of being in Beirut, Lebanon, where she lived for many years while teaching for AUB. And I think, I think she was really trying to attempt to walk this line between how can you speak about something without speaking for something, thinking through Chenti Minhaj's concept of speaking nearby. So a lot of the images come from interior domestic space. There's affective use of light, compositions that perhaps are more reflective. The way in which images are captured are often as portals, kind of looking from within and out. And this project was developed over a long period of time. The artist recently actually has been working on continued writing of this work. And this work also includes an interview that I think is really lovely in dialogue with Corinne, where there's a discussion about the role and ethics of the art making that centers the artist's practice. So I feel like the compression of time, specifically, being able to look backward into one's own educational studies, into the things that inform a photographic practice that then are continuously explored within the image making process. So this is predominantly film, and this was a softcover book, so digital printing, which is also something that we do sometimes. And then kind of thinking more about the risograph space, the use of overlaying of composition is something that I think comes up in a lot of more recent work that we've been publishing. This book was produced by Matt Neff. It's Hyperopia. And the interest here is really about the overlaying and obfuscating of time and memory as a space that's always shifting. So most of the images are composed of numerous photographs that have been layered, kind of excavated, and worked back into. So there's a lot of loss and like image erasure that takes place. And that the sort of time portal here is more about a compression of space that when overlaid, you may catch like a detail of a place that is neither here nor there. Like the image on the bottom right, there's an image that's present, it's kind of missing. And a lot of Neff's work includes this exploration and experimentation with media. So I think these, like we do a couple of different things, but this is definitely in one of the realms that we're publishing, where things are more about the poetic and abstracted photographic space versus more narrative storytelling. This is a project with Charles Hall, Ultra Volume 1, that released a few years ago now. This was a co-published project with Mimi and Weaver's Ultra, which is based in Belmont, West Philadelphia. This is a community space, and the inaugural publication was about celebrating Hall's family history. So the familial archive kind of comes back center again. The inaugural exhibition of this work was meant to celebrate his grandparents, who are pictured on the right, Mimi and Weaver, and their history of being community organizers and activists in Belmont, West Philly. The work was meant to be shown with exhibitions. So the artist is actually organizing shows out of the home, which is the image that is central here. And a lot of the shows are about artists who are working in video, different forms of photographic image making, graphic design, some performance-based practices. And that the newspaper could really function as a place for community exchange. So if you're walking by the exhibition, you might pick up a newspaper. And it really was about a family archive. So the images in it include pictures from the neighborhood, the kind of intersections of the corner at Holly and Ogden, as well as the changing landscape. So West Philadelphia, like most of Philadelphia, has gone through a lot of gentrification in recent years, which is one of the kind of themes within the work. And then I'm gonna sort of close out with, I still make artist books and I'm still working on a long-term project. And so along with publishing a lot of different kinds of artists who I'm in community with, I am also thinking about my own work. I am also from Orange County, California, and I'm committed to storytelling from that region and thinking about the archive as a site that is always in question. And so this work is being made out of the University Archive at UCI, which is University of California, Irvine, and the Orange County Archives. So both public archives. It's a research-laden project. Will become a much larger book project. But I think that in recent years, this has been like moving alongside some of the other topics and themes that I've been interested in. specifically as a critique of Orange County and its history of conservatism, which is very distinct to the region, for those of you that know Orange County. And the intersection of that being someone who grew up as Chicana in a mixed race identity and through adoption, and what that means in place-based practices. So I think this commitment to the archive is kind of consistent throughout my work, but it is also something I'm always curious how artists decide how they're going to make work from something that's archival, as well as historical, and how they may make interventions within that process. So that kind of carries me into Magali's work. And we're currently working on a project that will release in spring of 2024, April of 2024. And this is an exciting project for me because it reconnects to a lot of the themes that got me into publishing. Magali is a writer and very much research-based in her approach. And so the project has been developing for a while, and I think I'm excited to see where that takes us, but also that I think as a publisher, it's an opportunity to rethread themes and approaches in working style that can get lost in the approach of something growing. So press has changed a lot over the last 5 years, and I'm super excited. We're going to release a hardcover book. It will be our first, which is a special, and I think if you haven't seen the books in the back of the room, later check them out because Magali also has a tiny hardcover book that is really beautiful, and also other types of projects that will give you a better sense of her work. So I'm going to pass it off to you.
Thank you for that transition introduction. And thank you everyone for coming out. So I'm going to get back to this project in a minute, but before that, I'm going to talk about some of my older work just as a way to introduce my practice and to connect to a lot of what Lindsay talked about, because that was also really a nice reminder for me of why we're working together. So I am a photographer and a writer, or an artist and a writer. I work primarily in publications, but also installation. And I wanted to start with this book because it's both sort of my first book and most recent book. In 2015, I published a book with Conveyor Editions called I Looked and Looked. And I had just moved back to New York, where I'm originally from California, and kind of having this feeling of dislocation. I had read this beautiful exchange between George O'Keeffe and Alfred Stieglitz, where they write to each other about the moon on the same night. And I was like, I'm going to ask everyone I know to do this. And I did. And I didn't realize that there was a hurricane approaching. And so I had to write to everybody again. And I was like, if you still do this, please be careful, but go for it. And so what transpired was 20 people writing to me about the moon from many different corners of the country and abroad, all in the same night. And this was kind of my first introduction to working with text, to working with books. And so we had published a small paperback, and we just released last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, at Printed Matter, a hardcover edition that's kind of an update. But so it's sort of this nice thing. A lot of my work, I kind of come back to projects or I revisit. And so this was just one example of that. And then another project that's a kind of funny one and actually has no photographs, but is very visual. Is a book called Light Blue Desire, a Manual for the Color Blue. And so I was making cyanotypes in my studio, and I had this very harebrained idea, because I'm not the most technical photographer, that I was going to make cyanotypes with slide projectors. And I called all of my friends who are far more talented, and they all said, that is not going to work. And it did, but with much trial and error, and not in the way that I thought it would. And so while I was doing all of this research, I was looking into the history of cyanotypes, and then I came across the cyanometer, which is this instrument that measures the blueness of the sky. And it was created in the 1700s by this like gentleman scientist who wanted to know why the sky was blue. And so very scientifically, he painted a watercolor circle and held it up to the sky. And he would trek through the Alps and make these notations like the sky is 54 degrees blue. But it did not answer his question of why it was blue. But I was obsessed with this like desire to qualify and quantify this color. And so this book is a collection of idioms from multiple languages that all use the word blue. So looking at the fact that I have to start touching the laptop and not just gesturing. So looking at how some languages, when you say blue, you're talking about drunkenness or sadness or joy or pornography or something holy. And so the only kind of visual element is the cyanometer, which is this die cut on the cover of the book. And then every chapter, which kind of is a theme of blue, adds 1 degree. And so this, I think, was kind of the first time where I also was working with the designer Ilana Schlenker to really kind of piece together sort of these outside parts of my research into a project. And then I returned to blue multiple times. And then I just included this one because I love this project. It is a free catalog. It's called Whole Queens Catalog. I did this with the Queens Museum for a show about stewardship. And I kind of based it off of Whole Earth Catalog and interviewed a bunch of groups around Queens who are doing environmental stewardship. And I think this was also just a project where I really started thinking about the accessibility of the work. So I really appreciate that I have been able to make a lot of publications that are either free or very affordable. And there's something really important to me as I kind of continue to make work to think through how it reaches audiences. So this is also available as a PDF with nice little clickable links. And so if you're like a bird watcher, there are some great tips in there. Oof, okay. And then this is a project where I sort of returned to photography. And this one is also in the back, if you want to look at it later. It's called The Moon and Stars Can Be Yours. It's a pocket-sized guide to modern mysticism by way of the New York City subway system. So I had been collecting the Kino type flyers that you find on the subway, Miss Teresa as well, who comes in many guises, it turns out. And I was trying to figure out what it was that I was so interested in about these flyers. And I realized it was the language that was being used. And I had this kind of desire to know more about the sort of manipulation of language, but also the aspiration involved in it. And so I started to research. And with this book, it was the first time I went to the New York Public Library's picture collection, which has now become really integral to a lot of my projects. And so to kind of make sense of these flyers, I had about 40 of them. I started to group them. Yeah.
We just got this computer today, so I hadn't set the...
It's sort of the like shut off because
Yeah, I'm sorry.
it's okay. I was going to say I'll apologize to my mother because I know I'm gesturing too much instead of maybe hitting a key. Oh yeah, I think is it screen? I think it's screensaver. Oh no, that's actually just a screensaver.
I'm so sorry.
No worries.
They make it really hard, huh? Does anyone know where this is? Should have been on it.
It's under like a green thing, like a recycling or like
Oh yeah, is it under battery?
Everyone, this is a group effort.
Battery maybe up here.
Oh my god. Wow, okay, let me just get into this really quick. Screensaver.
Oh, turn. Oh no, when enact.
Wow, this is terrible. Okay, maybe we'll take a short break between once you finish, and then I'll.
Okay, I was gonna say I'll also just I'll just touch the screen. I will not take my hands off of the laptop. This is like when I learned how to touch type. I was really bad at it. But so I went to the picture collection to start looking up images around fortune tellers and astrology, and I started to make lists of all the words on these flyers, and then to find the folders that had the subject headings that might match. And it was this really wonderful kind of scavenger hunt to find imagery. And then the images I scanned and cropped and inversed and then kind of blew up with the halftone. And so this sort of provided this black and white basis of imagery and kind of these psychic tropes. And then the text that accompanies is broken up into chapters, and every chapter is a question that I asked a psychic. So will I find love? Should I continue to make art? Should I stay in New York? And the texts are quite humorous. They also sort of look at the role of women in fortune telling and the space of scam, but also of empowerment. So like Victoria Woodhull, the first woman to run for president, the first woman to own a newspaper, got her start as a spiritualist, speaking at seances. And I just chose to include these two spreads sort of as image examples, but then I thought these two Guardian newspaper article titles were the perfect kind of summation of what I was looking at. And it's Stargazing, Why Millennials Are Turning to Astrology. And then 3 days later, Why Astrology is Turning to Millennials. And so, yeah, I was just really interested in not being a believer, but kind of wondering why people are interested and trying to sort of get to that myself. And then quickly, I am currently working on a project, or I have worked on a project that will be published in the future. But I did an exhibition in New Orleans at this really lovely space, Antenna Gallery. And it was a show called A Tree, a Garden, and it featured work from a new project, A Tree Grows in Queens, which are these kind of quite large wall-size scaled collages of images about trees that are both photographs I've taken and photographs from archives and collages. And the text is 10 chapters about specific trees or types of trees found in New York City and connecting them to these sort of larger themes, all in the hopes of kind of challenging plant blindness and why we don't look at trees as specifically as we do other people or animals even. And so some of the trees I wrote about, this one in the middle, the Harlem Wishing Tree, which is now a slice of stump at the Apollo Theater that people rub for good luck before they perform. Or I write about migration and the World's Fair and the planting of palm trees and orange trees in Queens. And then the title gets its name both from A Tree Grows in Brooklyn and this crazy story in my family of my mother and her siblings buying a pink dogwood for their mother, planting it in the yard, and years later it disappeared. And it turned out that my grandfather had dug it up and replanted it in a city park. And his reasoning was that it just didn't fit. And so I've tried looking for this tree. You can't find it. But that really kind of got me sort of thinking about how we relate to trees and how we have them embody things for ourselves. So these are just some examples of that also I think kind of got me back to working with my own photographs as well. And then sort of the last older project that I wanted to talk about, just because it's the newest, was related to that Tree Grows in Queens. While doing the show at Antenna, I was presented with this great opportunity to make a book. And so I made this small stapled booklet called The Dry Garden. And that came from, one, my interest in cyanotypes, and two, some of my research for the tree book into herbaria, which are scientific collections of dried plants. And you can find them kind of open access through the Smithsonian Institute at the New York Botanical Garden. And they have this really fascinating history that is deeply tied to colonialism, that is deeply tied to climate change now, and also just these ideas of sort of public access to science. And so it's a number of texts that look at ecological catastrophe, very fun subject, the catty humor of botanists. So I write about Carl Linnaeus and his penchant for insult naming plants for his rivals, which was wonderful to do some research on. But this kind of nicely then tied back to that blue book and some of the cyanotypes I was making. And the structure of it, why I went with the cyanotypes, was for Anna Atkins' Photographs of British Algae, which was the first photo book ever published. And so that's kind of to give you a quick but long background. This is just an installation example. So the whole side of one gallery was kind of papered with these images that I made from open source material, created cyanotypes, in some points enlarged, cropped, layered, and really focusing also on the human aspect of how people are writing to the scientists at the National Institute of Plants, or how people are sending samples asking if there is blight in their seeds. And then also looking at how plants migrate and where they end up. Which then gets me back finally to La Vie is Like That. So this is a project that is in progress. I'm going to show some slides of photographs of some prints that Lindsay has made when we were first talking about it. I'm also going to show you some spreads that are kind of mock-ups of how I'm thinking about it. And yeah, I'm excited to sort of talk about it as an in-progress process because it's still sort of coming together. I will, I'm sorry, read this long text just because I think it will kind of help place the project. But La Vie is Like That takes its inspiration from this philosophical thought experiment, The Ship of Theseus, that reflects on the concept of the persistence of identity. If every part of an object is replaced over time, is it the same object? La Vie explores the connection between language and identity. The impetus for the work began as I was endeavoring to learn a language, whilst my father began forgetting his own. The work in text and images touches upon themes of change, immigration, connection, dementia, loss, speech, love, and humor. The book is structured as an alphabet primer. So A is for aphasia, E is for Emerson dreaming, Q is for Quora, a terrible place to look for answers. That blends languages, reflecting my father's combinations of French, Creole, and English, as well as my own study of German. Weaving its way between Greek myth, the lives of writers, Japanese shrines, grammar, and personal observations, the texts build a narrative around shifting identity and ask how the language we use shapes the people we become. And so I included this image because it might be the cover of the book, but it is also an image I found kind of maybe halfway through first thinking about this project. My father passed away 2 years ago. And after he passed away, we were sort of cleaning out a closet and found this photograph. And I realized that I had never seen a photograph of my father as a young man. I had only ever seen photographs of him from about 45 on. And I had this moment of being kind of like, is that him? And the more that I looked, the more I realized, yes, of course it is. But it was this odd thing to think of the person I knew and this person that I maybe never did. And then as time went on and I started writing as a means of kind of processing some stuff, I realized that I had never seen this man, but I knew this man through the stories he had told me. Also, I mean, he was a looker, so that was also nice. I was just like, hey. So like I said, this is a mock-up of the cover. When Lindsay first told me it would be a hardcover book, I was very excited because somebody once told me hardcover books are grown-up books, and I was very happy. And then just there's this contact sheet to sort of give a sense of kind of how the images will look as risograph prints. So when I said that it was sort of inspired by this Ship of Theseus thought experiment, I was really thinking about the persistence of identity in the sense of how we talk about identity and the language we use around it. And at the time when my father was first diagnosed with dementia, thinking about how the language people use around dementia is so full of fear. And it's so connected to this concept that cognition means humanity, or that we judge someone's humanity through some connection to cognition. And if there's a loss of that, it's the most frightening thing. And I was just kind of doing more and more reading and research, and my own conversations with my father were sometimes very strange and funny, and often just really interesting and profound. And I realized that so much of this fear is also just not accepting change and not accepting that, you know, identity changes, but that is a natural thing. You can still be the same. And so I started to read about the Ship of Theseus. And then when I started thinking about, through our conversations, that all of a sudden I was connecting with my father in this new way, because I was trying to learn a language as he was starting to forget words. And we were kind of meeting in the middle on these funny ways. And so I just started to keep notes of things that I wanted to ask, and things that he said. And as time went by, the Ship of Theseus kind of became this almost thing to return to keep thinking about the project. And so, like I said before, I'll go back to that. Much of my work is image and text based. I don't consider one or the other more important. I think they really do work together. So when I first had this idea of maybe I want to make a project about my father's aphasia and my own learning of language, and at the time, when I first started to think about this, I was wondering if I was going to move to a new country and what that meant and how I would maybe become a new person. I started to write, and then I realized that in my writing, I needed to have a structure, and I really love a structure in a book. So either questions to ask a psychic or iterations of blue. And so since this was all based around language, the structure became an alphabet primer. And so I love this idea of talking about this experience, not chronologically, but alphabetically, which kind of allows for this almost timeless form, or this cyclical time. And so then this is just another mock-up with my handy primer. And so I'm just going to read a few of the A is for aphasia, C is for bloomin', bananas and becoming, F is for Florida, G is for Grützi and guilt, I is for I don't say nothing, which my father would say after complaining about people. He would kind of give me the whole rant and then say, but I don't say nothing. K is for kaput, P is for puzzles, T is for tying shoelaces in a dream, V is for vocale, I learn Italian, Z is for Zeit, a limited entity. So these are some images. When I was thinking about writing about language and writing about identity and writing about these things that are sometimes very hard to grapple with, in terms of image making, I really wanted to stick with images that felt atmospheric, with images that dealt with light and time, when I was thinking about this move and moving to this new country and maybe becoming this new person, I realized that I was putting myself in the place of my father, who immigrated to the US from the Caribbean when he was 20 years old. And so I started to go through my own archives to kind of find images that I had made, maybe for no reason, but more just out of interest, and started to kind of pair them with some of the writing to give shape and form to this story. And so, at least as of now, the concept is for these texts, which are both short and small, to be paired with images or imagery. And so this is one of the sample texts. E is for Emerson dreaming. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the transcendentalist writer, lecturer, poet, and abolitionist, spent his last years living with dementia. Struck by aphasia, his words began to disappear. Friends of his referred not to his deterioration, but rather to his being in a state of perpetual dreaming. And so much of my writing as well, I try to combine personal observation alongside historical research. I'm really interested in asking questions, but not necessarily providing solid answers. I think there's much more to find in the questions that you connect. And so these are also just some more images, again, thinking about kind of atmosphere and shadow and flattening space, as if kind of moving through this landscape that you recognize, but maybe don't. And so this is another text example. L is for Leth. In Greek mythology, to drink from the river Leth was to drink oneself into oblivion. The river, one of 5 found in the underworld, shares its name with the goddess of forgetfulness. It flowed around the cave of Hypnos, whose gentle babbling caused mortals to fall into sleep. The Leth was used to erase the memories of those who were to be reincarnated. One sip and they were a blank slate. And then here's just another spread of risographed prints. And when Lindsay first showed me them, I was really so sort of impressed with how much kind of depth and light comes through in the images. And so again, just some of these images where you kind of can place it, but sometimes you can't. And then this is another one, which I'm like, check the time, maybe I won't read it all, but within sort of my personal observations, my study of, right, how has dementia been described throughout history? How do we confront it now? How does language change how we see ourselves and see other people? I also came across kind of other really lovely examples. So this text, M is for meaning, Metamorphosis, talks first about the Roman poet Ovid's Metamorphoses, chronicling the history of the world from creation to the deification of Caesar. It focuses on transformation and love, and it closes with an epilogue that references the need for things to give way to change. And then I really wanted to include this because I had read this beautiful interview with Dwayne Michaels, where he talked about his partner, Fred Garay, who died in 2017. He had Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. But in this interview, he talked about the wonderfully strange things that Garay had said. And so a sample from the article of Fredisms. I saw you eating a banana. What was the meaning of that? I wonder what Marco Polo's doing. On holidays, everybody likes lemons. Michaels talks about the metamorphosis of his partner, explaining, we've been together for a long time and I've known him over many incarnations. There's the infatuation Fred, there's the long-term Fred, and this is the last of the Freds. But all of the Freds that I've known, this is maybe the best one. This is Fred exiting. There's no subterfuge. He says exactly what he feels. I asked Fred, why do you think we're here? And he replied, to take care of each other. And I thought that was brilliant. That's the only meaning, asked and answered. And then again, some of these images as I was thinking about them and going through the archives, I was looking for kind of reflections and looking through spaces and obfuscation, but kind of beauty in that obfuscation, or images like this one on the right, where you're kind of looking at something and you know what it is, but you can't quite tell, but it's almost better that you can't tell. It is its own thing through itself. And then this is another one. I wanted to include quotes from people who, were not my person, just as a way to kind of flesh it out and get more sense also over time. And so Jonathan Swift, who wrote Gulliver's Travels, had this very beautiful, sad line when he began to show signs of what today would be considered dementia, but at the time was not quite known. And in a letter to a friend, he wrote, "I have been many months the shadow of the shadow of the shadow." And so I guess I should also point out that I wanted to include kind of these both sides, not to kind of try to gussy it up or pretend like there isn't sadness and difficulty, but also to sort of show the many ways that we confront this and experience this, and the complexity of it beyond kind of just fear or something to not talk about. And again, more of these photographs, which also, so as all of this was going on, I moved to Switzerland. And this was sort of another great way for me to make photographs again and experience a new landscape and kind of come to terms with being in a new place and maybe becoming a bit of a new me or a new version of myself. This is one of the last ones. Z is for Zeit, a limited entity. And I guess this will be the last one I'll read. One morning we gathered the sunflowers that we had cut in a field earlier in the week. We tossed them into the river as a goodbye. I would like to say that it was early, quiet, it was peaceful and perfect. But I dithered over breakfast and dragged my feet. The spot we chose was the point of a small island in the river, beyond the allotment gardens, past the nude section, below the swimming spot. It was occupied by a trio filming some sort of instructional yoga video on an iPhone. A woman squatted uncomfortably on a rock. A man slouched in a camping chair, finished off a 10 a.m. beer. Another filmed, smoking a cigarette, his phone on the dinkiest tripod. I hesitated to toss the flowers, eyeing up the scene, wondering what it would mean if they didn't rush away with the current, if they got stuck. If I could block out whatever was being filmed as the woman slipped off her rock, unable to hold her increasingly odd poses. But I placed them in the water and said goodbye because the sun was shining, the sky was blue. And as a wise man once said with a shrug and a smile, la vie is like that. So yeah, I guess that's my last image. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure I missed something, but it'll come to me. Yeah. Yeah.
In which understanding do you see time as limited?
I mean, I guess the time that we physically experience one-on-one. I think time goes on, but I think time can be a limited entity when it comes to the relationships we have in a physical sense, or the ways in which maybe we underestimate time. I think it's something I'm still figuring out with the project and with myself. So.
And I think it's a good split that you're taking, the side that you're experiencing and the other side that exists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes, I was a little confused. So would be like this, like this, like this, like that.
Yeah.
Do you know the book by Charlie Harbert?
No, I
Life
don't.
is like this.
No.
Is it? Right. Life is like that.
All right, I'm
That's
writing
very
this down.
Classic, very
Yeah.
famous
Hmm.
black and white photography, Charles
Okay.
Harbert. And it was mostly people, or you had sections.
Mm.
You know, so one was about death and one
Yeah.
was about home,
Mhm.
you know. So in your book, you're moving through it like more cinematically.
Yeah.
So, but you have a lot of diptychs. So in the diptychs, are they relating to each other in some way?
No. The diptychs were just more of a way to show images together here. Within the book, how I'm thinking about it is they will be one image per text. And so I don't want the images to be illustrative of the text, but to sort of give more a sense of an environment or a moment in time. I realized I maybe should have said like, these are not diptychs, but they were not diptychs, but they were diptychs. But time,
It does feel like that.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to figure out, is this what a found image and this is a made? An image?
Yeah. I mean, all of these images beyond the photograph of my father are images I have made. The only other found image, which I actually skipped over, is this one, which I sort of included in my research because when I was thinking about the ship of Theseus and I was thinking about the persistence of identity and how things change over time and an object, is it the same? I then came across the Issei Naiku shrines in Japan, which are rebuilt every 20 years. And it's this process that's been going on, I think, since the year like 630 or something. And I think it's maybe in 2030, 38 or something that the next one will be rebuilt. But yeah, so that's the only found image. But I kind of included this one just as a reference point for almost the pattern I was seeing of this concept of time
So do you
repeating.
say in the book that these shrines were rebuilt
They're rebuilt every 20 years.
just like the ship Theseus?
I mean, kind of the ship.
That was
The ship of Theseus
repaired and
is
kept going out?
is sailed out every year, and the idea being that every time something needs to be replaced, a piece is replaced, and at some point, perhaps 100 years later, if no original piece is on the ship, can it still be the same ship? So this idea, what is it object or is it concept? Is it object or is it the importance we place on something? I'm no expert, but with the Japanese shrines, they're rebuilt every 20 years, both as a means of keeping like a traditional building style alive and as sort of honoring the sun goddess with this concept that people are coming together to renew this building.
That seems, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
And I feel that you're really a scholar. And that what you were presenting, I find your words very striking, your writing.
Thank you.
Extremely striking. I don't know about the photography.
Yeah.
The photography does feel illustrative. Maybe
Mhm.
not really, but
Yeah.
it's kind of wallpaper.
Hmm.
Kind of like an atmospheric kind of.
Yeah.
Maybe unnecessary. I don't know.
I
Your
think,
writing is so strong.
thank you. I like the atmospheric aspect of the writing as a way to bring a viewer in.
Yeah.
But yeah.
On that note, I just wanted to say,
Yeah.
I feel like I have a different question.
Okay.
But the juxtaposition,
Yeah.
I think there's a poetry to the way that you
Mhm.
laid out these ideas as
Yeah.
opposed to them being a classical essay. And
Yeah.
your inclusion of those photographs
Mhm.
lends itself to the poetry
Yeah.
of there being a sense that you walk away with
Yeah.
from these thoughts, both thoughts from looking at something and thinking about
Mhm.
something or reading about something. And so as opposed to a book I would read specifically for information,
Yeah.
this is a book that I would pick up for a different
Yeah.
reason because of that.
Yeah.
It's my personal thing.
Thank
But
you.
anyway,
Yeah.
My question just about all of these book projects
Yeah.
is, and maybe you said this and I somehow missed this, but do you start with, you do create a book idea and then look for someone to publish it? Or do you create a concept through talking to someone who's going to publish it already? Or
Yeah.
is it different every time, or does it start as one thing and then after there's a collaborative element, it changes direction?
I think it's a little bit of everything. So every book has been like the very first book I did, the Looked and Looked with the Moon. I made a zine myself, and I was working for Conveyor Studio as their studio manager. And one of the perks I had was I could like print a proof if I needed something. And I printed a proof, and I was friendly with the press guy, and he was like, you should show this to the publisher and director. And then they were like, yeah, we would publish this. This seems really interesting. And so that was something where the project kind of developed on its own in pieces. And the book that I created, which is very close in design to the finished product, was then published. The blue book with the idioms came out of, I was invited to propose something for an exhibition at Flux Factory, and I kind of came up with it. And then I was no longer at Conveyor, but I reached out to them to see if they would just print a proof for me. And then they saw it and they were like, this is cool, we'll publish that. So I've had a long-standing relationship with them, which now I'm at the point of kind of like, if I have a project idea, I can say, I think I want to work on this. Would you be interested? And then for something like the book with Antenna, that came out of, I had another book and I was like, oh, cool, I have this show opportunity. And they said, oh, well, you can also publish something. And so they kind of gave me the opportunity to publish something. And I was like, I need to come up with an idea. And I did. And then with this project with Lindsay, I was going to say, I think we've known each other for a while and we've kind of talked about some things. And Lindsay kind of presented me with an opportunity and just said, like, I'd like to work with you. Do you have an idea? And I kind of had this in the back of my head. And it was sort of the perfect kind of shove to make it more than a bunch of Google Docs, which is what most of my work just exists as. So, yeah. Yeah. And thank you for your earlier comment. I appreciate that. Yeah. But yeah.
Make a correction.
Yes.
The book is travelogue.
Okay. Travelogue.
All
I'll
right,
write that down.
and the question is, ask yourself, is life like that? The
Ah,
book is actually Travelogue by Charlie Hobbit.
thank you for the recommendation. I'll look that up. Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Just like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Yeah, like coffee.
Yeah. Yeah. Does everyone do a stretch?
So please stick around for that, and I'll see you in like 2 minutes, 5 minutes.
We're about at time.
Yeah.
We also have questions, or I have questions for you, if not.
Try to answer.
Oh, those can't
this-
be
I
so
thought-
close together.
Try to answer them.
Okay, I'm just gonna ask one, and then if something else comes up, I'll move away from you though. One of the things that I think was already articulated, but in your writing that is so striking is the harnessing of language with words that have such impact. I feel like every time I read your writing, I have this experience. And I would note for people here who are not familiar with your work that The Moon and the Stars really is in the same kind of vein of the work that you're currently working on, which makes sense to me because it's recent. They come kind of close together. But I know you are such a reader and have so many influences, but curious if you could kind of speak about the way in which you write, the relationship to language, and how you sort of build between this research-based practice, which is at the core of your work, and your own writing, because it just sort of weaves. I feel like you have this balance in the writing that's poetic and profound. And if you had anything you wanted to talk about writing style.
Yeah. Get that. I'll try to keep it short. I think one thing that you said is I'm a very big reader. I read. I always tell people I read a grotesque amount. And when I ask people, like, how do you get so much done? I realize it's because I read instead of complete work tasks. So that's it. I also, when I was still living in New York City, I lived in Queens and I worked in Brooklyn. And so people would always say, you read so much. And I'd say, I'm on the train forever. And so that was great use of time. So I think it is the reading, right? I read a ton of fiction. I read nonfiction. I read widely and voraciously. I mark my books up. I keep notes. I write things down, even if it's just like a turn of phrase I like. And I keep all of that kind of in my studio to refer back to. And sometimes I use those as writing prompts. I love researching. I love acting like a scholar without being a scholar, in the sense of kind of how I feel like I can kind of jump around, because I'm not presenting any of this work as scholarly research. This is sort of me trying to tell a specific story through observation and humor and anecdote and fact. And then I think the biggest thing is that I write the way I speak. And I think it might sound silly, but I think I kind of just noticed I just naturally write how I talk. And so there's a kind of conversational aspect to the writing that I personally respond to, do naturally, and find enjoyable to read, because I want to express myself as if I'm talking to you in my writing. So I don't want it to kind of feel like I'm sitting down and I have to really go over this. I want you to read something as if I was just telling it to you face to face. So I think that's kind of where that comes from. Yes. Yeah.
I would turn that question to you, Lindsay. You didn't talk a lot about your writing, but it was visible in the books that you are kind of displaying. But how is that your own writing? Is that appropriated text? Like, how does language work with your photo books?
Yeah, it is my own writing, and I'm also a big reader and a writer. And I think I would say that's what drew us together in the first place. I think when I had originally reached out to Magali, it was because I knew her work and understood her practice to be of a kindred spirit. And the process is similar for me. And I think it has felt actually very important to kind of come back to this project, or to come to a new project with her, because of that love for research-based practice. I spend a lot of time in the stacks. I also am kind of mining language, and all of the didactics are carefully crafted, and all of that is, yes, my writing. And I tend to work with artists, sometimes with, honestly, artists who are not writers, and I have a way of then like working collaboratively with them to find language for their practice. But it's mixed. Like half the people I work with are definitely writers. Heather M. O'Brien's work, also, she's an excellent writer. And that was a huge part of her project as well. So I would say there's an affinity there, but I also like that collaborating with people, you get to kind of draw that out in them and then work with them to find language that's appropriate for their project. Yeah, it's a great question. Are there any other questions that people have that we can answer? Yeah.
I was late and I apologize.
Oh, no worries.
But so you might have said this and I missed it, but I was wondering where you are based, where.
Here, nearby. I am new to the Hudson Valley. I'm in Hudson now. I was based in Philadelphia for many years, the first 5 years of the project, and we just situated the studio up here.
Okay.
So not far, about 30 minutes if you're from this region. Yeah, I'm like 30 minutes-ish away. Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
You mentioned that you were looking at these images now in Riso because of your collaboration. Where does the Riso happen? Is that something that you print yourself and then you get it bound?
I do. So I should have prefaced with my background as a printer. I have a printmaking background and kind of came through photography through print. So I have a studio with a Riso. I have a risograph machine. And I do all of the printing and production. And honestly, until recently, I used to do all of the finishing for handmade books. I also send out for digital books, those just go to our printers. And we have printers in London and Italy and the US. But for risograph books, I work collaboratively with people to do bindery finishing. So sometimes I'll send to binders in Pennsylvania. This project will be working with colleagues and friends who are in Los Angeles. And it just depends on the project. But sometimes I can do the finishing myself and sometimes I can't. Hardcover, no way. I'm not binding that by hand. But someone else will be, and there are people who have these skills, and it's amazing getting to work collaboratively with other presses and friends who are also publishing.
Do you work on this is a question for Magali, like it seems like your work always sort of culminates in the book project. Is that do you feel like that is your medium and you don't really sort of think outside the book? It sounds terrible.
I don't think outside the box, the book, this room.
Like, do you feel like you're like, if you were to sort of exhibit, like, do you ever see like an exhibition? I mean, I guess you did have an exhibition.
Yeah.
Antenna. How would this be like in the form of an exhibition, or would it not?
I have to say, with this project, I don't know. I feel like this is a project I really thought of, conceptualized from the very beginning as a book. But yeah, I would kind of say that recently I've just found myself making publications, either books or like that whole Queen's catalog was just this like 1,000 copy run of like a big tabloid, but it's also a PDF. And I did a similar project like that for ABC No Rio for something that's was printed in edition of 1,000 at the gallery, but is also accessible PDF that clicks out to like all these archival images. And but I would say I'm an 80% bookmaker. Like I think 80% of the work I'm doing is ending up in books or starting off as books, but I still do like for the cyanotype Dry Garden book, that was really first prints and then a book. And the Tree Grows in Queens book was conceived of as a book. And then I really now see that as also an exhibition. And in the exhibition in New Orleans, I did have the text available. So you would have these kind of large wall-sized collages of the photographs, but you also had the text. So that was a very sort of one-to-one, like the book on the wall. Some of it has to do just with studio space. Right before the pandemic, I gave up my studio space because I was working on books and I was just like, I don't need this space right now. And then I kind of continued to work on books because it fits. But the original cyanotypes I was making maybe about 5-6 years ago were these like large 9-foot silk pieces that actually exposed in a gallery, like in an exhibition space. So it would kind of be, you know, an exposure of a day or an exposure of a week. And so, yeah. I think it was me. Yeah. I have shown them around. I've had to explain to people like, it might not work. Like in the gallery, that's part of it. But yeah, so, and that's still stuff that I would like to continue to do. But sometimes it's just a space issue. So 80% books, 20% other, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you so very much.